Welcome to the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of entrepreneurship.
In today's episode, we delve into the critical role of feedback in the entrepreneurial journey. We will explore how seeking and receiving constructive feedback isn't just a step towards improvement. It's a powerful accelerator for growth, innovation, and customer satisfaction.
If you're looking to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit and transform your ideas into action, we invite you to follow our podcast.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Tune in, buckle up, and let's unleash the entrepreneurial spirit within. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing brilliantly as always. What about you?
Doing well. I understand you were playing with some water today.
I had a friend with a pretty serious water leak in his house, so I decided I'd lend a hand.
You're multitasking. All right. Today, I wanted to speak about a topic that, as all of them, I always say they're very important, but this one is critical, I believe. And this is the role of feedback in your entrepreneurial journey.
It is critical. There's a lot of different thoughts on how you should get it, if you should get it. So I think this will be a fun one for us to dive into and for our listeners to hear.
Mainly, I'm thinking of the feedback, not from a personal perspective, even though we probably intertwine some of that, but feedback from your actual business venture. Seeking and receiving constructive feedback, it's not just a step for improvement, but you can accelerate your growth. It creates innovation, and also customer satisfaction can be a component if you're using constructive feedback properly.
It's of vital importance, or else we sort of create this scenario in which we're in a room by ourselves listening to our own voice echo instead of getting the feedback from how we're perceived by other people.
I always say, I already know what I know, so it's a good idea to go get other people's opinions or inform people's opinions on the venture that I'm driving.
It's also important because a lot of people are very bad at this aspect. They're not good at hearing this feedback, or they don't want it, or there's some sort of hesitation to receiving it.
That's one of the things that I see very often with my students. I have to actually teach them how to receive constructive feedback without being defensive. We alluded to the improvements of business operations, and there is a personal growth, but also enhanced decision-making can be a component of receiving feedback. If you're doing it within your company, it can foster engagement and loyalty among the entire culture of the business. And you can build a responsive and adaptable business culture as a result of open, constructive feedback.
Without a doubt, that open and constructive feedback is what makes great organizations last for a long time, because they have an ability to stay in touch with people that are actually making decisions. So as the organization grows and you get more and more levels to the organization, how does everybody stay on the same page?
And the first question that pops into my mind is, what sources of feedback should you be seeking? I'm thinking in terms of customers are very important, employees, your peers, mentors and advisors, also suppliers and business partners, and don't ignore online communities and forums for feedback.
I'll throw one more in there as investors. If you have investors, they should be somebody you're listening through feedback. Hopefully they're also an advisor or a mentor as an investor, but they don't always have to be.
And my experience is they're not bashful in providing feedback.
Yeah, they'll give it to you whether you want it or not.
How I craft the questions is very important. I tend to ask open-ended questions, and I'm looking for specific, useful insights that I'm trying to elicit.
The way you approach the person matters a lot. And this is the same sort of thing you're talking about with cueing. Dr. Crystal White does something called free leadership. She talked about, we often know in conversations, think of a loved one approaching you and asking your advice, to ask them, well, what role do you want me to play in this? I have a tendency to try and solve problems where most of the time I should be listening to those problems and just acknowledging that they exist. Dr. Crystal White framed it really interesting. We all know that intuitively, but we don't often practice it in the reverse. So when you're going to somebody for feedback, very specifically framing what type of feedback you're looking for. And that sort of sets the pace for the conversation and also cues yourself to be open to that feedback because you have directly asked for it.
And within that, you want to be very specific and contextual with the feedback. For example, you might say, what features do you find most useful in our new software updates? Versus saying, what do you think of our software updates?
And that's a good example. So that's the cueing, right? You're very specifically looking for what in our new features do you like, not let's open the floodgate.
The listening skills are extremely important because it's not necessarily a one question feedback. There can be an interaction in exchange, follow up to dig deeper. You said our customer service was excellent. What did the team do that stood out for you would be an example of how to frame that.
That would be a great one. And everyone listening to this can imagine getting asked for that and how important your feedback would then feel.
And you want to encourage honest feedback by using neutral wording. You don't want to lead the audience, if you will.
That's a good one if you want honest feedback, right? I think a lot of people are looking to lead the audience in a specific way.
Most people make the mistake of trying to lead the feedback in the direction that they want to hear. That's not constructive feedback. That's feedback, but it's not constructive at all or marginally constructive.
Startups will ask their mother, their aunt, and their best friend for the feedback. We all have different relationships with our mother, our aunt, and our best friend, but most likely they're not going to give you the brutal, honest feedback. Or they will, and they're just a little bit biased. So you're going to get really positive results every time you ask that group.
They're going to pat you on the head and they're going to be worried more about your feelings than about your business model. And very often they are not entrepreneurs. They don't understand the importance of it, and they just want you to feel good about yourself.
That's exactly right. They're not a great source of feedback.
And there's no growth there.
For those who aspire to go higher in their entrepreneurial journey, we've got something just for you. Coming up next.
Are you ready to unlock your entrepreneurial potential? Introducing the Janus Entrepreneurial Report, your personalized roadmap to success. In just minutes, discover your unique strengths and areas for growth. Whether you're a seasoned business pro or just starting out, the Janus Entrepreneurial Report will help you identify and leverage your entrepreneurial tendencies. Don't wait, visit ProfSpirit.com and start your journey to success today.
Now, let's dive back into our journey of entrepreneurial insights.
I like to also ask for comparative feedback. If I'm looking at, say, talking to my employees, I might ask them to compare their experience working in one department versus a previous department. So it can have a head-on-head, one-on-one comparison. And that really can give you a benchmark from where you are.
That's a really good one. I believe it's Amazon that does the criticism papers where all the employees are required to write criticism papers. And then those papers get reviewed. So you have to critique something that's going on and write a suggestion on how to fix it. You saying different departments really made me think of that. In an organization as large as Amazon, I'm sure from department to department, it could feel like working at an entirely different company. Being able to draw the positives and the negatives from each one of those departments could be a huge leap forwards.
And you can basically be building on the strengths from each department, but makes the entirety of the organization stronger.
That's exactly right.
Another technique that I like to use is using hypotheticals to explore future improvements when I'm looking at product development. If I were to ask, if I added XYZ feature, how would this change the usage of our product?
That's amazing. Depending on who you're asking, right? It can drive the answer in many different ways. If you ask the developer that question, you could get some really cool analytical responses from that. If you asked a client, somebody using the product, you might get a whole nother slew of answers.
You and I are doing some work on developing a means of measuring a company's entrepreneurial cultures, and we're using a technique that you can use in feedback of using scaling questions to measure data. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you recommend our service to others? That still could be useful in a one-on-one, but if you're looking at a broader audience, that scaling question can be very helpful, and it's easier to accumulate and compile the data to come up with a definitive answer.
I don't know whether this is just totally anecdotal. I don't have anything to back it up, but I've always liked the 1 through 10, not the 1 through 5, because I feel like the difference between, a 6 and a 10 and the difference between a 3 and a 5 is much larger.
I'm trying to think of my memory banks. I think I mainly use a 1 to 10.
And again, totally anecdotal, just my feeling on it, but I feel like you get a wider range of responses doing it that way.
From a cultural perspective, the feedback loop on a continuous is very important. You want to lead by example, so the C-suite has to be able to receive constructive feedback, not just to give the feedback to people. So there has to be bidirectional associated with this.
You don't want to run a company like a tyranny?
That would be a bad idea, but I see it happen all the time.
You really do. I even see it in the companies that I'm consulting with. It can be quite a difficult point of it, particularly if I don't agree based on my analysis with something that's going on.
Yeah, there's always a sign when that's going on is when there's rapid turnover.
Right. Are people fleeing?
Now, one of the areas that to me is critical with feedback and receiving feedback specifically is the importance of active listening when receiving feedback. So it enhances understanding. It also builds trust and rapport, and you can reduce conflict by using active listening.
Right. And for those of our listeners that don't know, active listening is participating in the active listening. You're responding to the points that are being made. You're nodding your head. You're making eye contact. You're fully present during that feedback.
And with that, you have to keep an open mind. Now, also with feedback, when you have it built into your culture, it's important to document the outcomes and learning, and then you can analyze progress as you're moving forward.
Yeah, so year to year, if you're asking similar questions, you can see how the responses have grown over time.
Through your monitoring, you might have to adjust. It's also very important to communicate any progress that you have with your team.
Development teams do this a lot. And again, I might be biased because that's the world I really participate in. But oftentimes, a really simple example you'll see on the Apple App Store or the Android Store, when a new release comes out, they will say, you asked for these features, and here are the features we are now releasing. They very plainly state why they're releasing the feature and then what feature it is.
That's definitely very effective. My last thought before we wrap up is the common challenges that you face with feedback. And I think of two, but you might be able to add to this. The emotional reactions are a challenge, and misinterpretations are a challenge with feedback.
Also, people need to get over their gut reaction that they're being threatened in some way.
Yeah, if you're looking at constructive feedback properly, they are not attacking you. They're providing their honest feedback to you. And it's a matter of listening. You don't necessarily have to adopt it because they may be wrong, but you want to analyze and really seriously consider that, especially when the source is a very well-established, knowledgeable source.
Hopefully the person you've asked is someone you value the input from.
Any final thoughts before we close out the session?
Feedback is going to be a really important part of the journey of any entrepreneur. Learning to think critically about feedback and have a system of people you're going to get that feedback is going to become important. And the sooner you start taking it seriously, the faster you can get over that fear or that gut reaction that a lot of people have.
And I would encourage anyone that hasn't practiced receiving constructive feedback to start small. And in your next team meeting, ask for direct feedback and just see what the results are.
See how uncomfortable everyone gets in the room.
Well, on that note, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
As we wrap up another episode of the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, we extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Your dedication to the entrepreneurial spirit fuels our passion for creating this podcast. Check out ProfSpirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.